Hi there, and welcome to CREDC's Grow Clark County podcast. We're so glad you've joined us for this episode, From Startup to Scaleup, Tips from Investors. I'm Marnie Farness, Director of Relationships and Strategy, and it's Global Entrepreneurship Week. So it seemed like a great opportunity and excuse, quite frankly, for me to talk about raising capital. I'm thrilled to be talking today with two awesome supporters of innovation and entrepreneurship right here in the Pacific Northwest, Julie Harrelson with Cascade Seed Fund and John Maroney with Oregon Venture. We'll be sharing some valuable information on raising capital. CREDC is a public-private nonprofit where we work hard to strategically build a strong, resilient, and competitive economic ecosystem right here in Clark County. We have over 140 investors, both public and private, who believe in moving Clark County forward. We also have sponsors who step up to show their support for Grow Clark County events and podcasts. And a big thank you to our presenting sponsor for today's podcast, which is Tiger Stop, where they believe in empowering local manufacturers to be globally competitive. Also want to thank our partners and friends at IQ Credit Union, Perfect Company, and Firestone Pacific Foods for their generous support of this year's podcasts. And finally, CREDC partners closely with Washington State University, Vancouver, and the Carson College of Business Mentorship and Alliance Program, which offers no-cost business student-led consulting under the supervision of experienced business leaders, which are called mentors for them in the program. And this is a great program for new businesses, small businesses to consider. But before we jump into today's podcast with Julie and John, I've invited Nolan Yaz-Gonzalez, MAP's Senior Manager, to share a few things with you.
Hello, my name is Nolan Yaz-Gonzalez, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Senior Manager for the Business Growth Mentor and Analysis Program at Washington State University, Vancouver. We are proud to partner with organizations like the CREDC to help support the growth and success of businesses in the region. Each academic year, we pair up approximately 35 teams of seniors who are majoring in business administration with small businesses and nonprofit organizations in the region. Each business we work with is typically looking for help addressing core challenges, developing new strategies for growth, and overall wanting to become stronger and more successful. Each MAP student consultancy team works under the guidance of Carson College faculty and a volunteer mentor to provide around 500 hours of no-cost consulting to their client. The program is highly structured and confidential, and MAP student consultancy teams have made a lasting impact on more than 320 businesses over the last 10 years. If you're interested in learning more about the program, I'd love to connect. Please email bgmap@wsu.edu or call 360-546-9533.
Oh, thanks so much, Nolan. And now let's hear what Julie Harrelson and John Maroney have to say about raising capital. Just want to jump right in, Julie and John. Julie, I'll start with you, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and Cascade Seed Fund.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm a lifetime entrepreneur, and I started a fund based on investing in early stage companies in Oregon in 2014, and then joined with business partner Robert Pease in 2018 to start Cascade Seed Fund. Overall, we've made over 50 investments, have 20 plus million under management. And our goal is to match great entrepreneurs with great investors and create a different economic future for those investors, those entrepreneurs, and the Pacific Northwest region.
Love it. John.
So my name is John Maroney. I'm a partner at the Oregon Venture Fund. We, like Julie, are an organization that is organizing the talent and the capital we have in the region to build world-class companies here and help support those companies. We are a group of about 180 investors. We pool our money each year, and we invested in 5 to 8 of the most promising companies that we can find in Oregon and Southwest Washington. So that comes out to about 13 million a year in companies, and we've been doing it for quite a while. I joined in 2015. It was originally founded in 2007. And yeah, So I work with all the companies prior to us actually investing in them, and work with them and help them get ready for investment.
So, and John, you touched on this. You're both located in Oregon. John, you're in the Portland area. Julie, you go between Bend and Portland. I think it was that you mentioned, but you also serve Southwest Washington.
That is true.
Yeah.
And we have quite a few portfolio companies in Southwest Washington, which we're really proud of, and they're doing great things.
Very good.
Yeah, likewise, we've invested in the Perfect Company and Hub and Absci, are the three that I come to mind immediately.
Yeah.
Tool Belt, Slumberkins, Class Hero.
Those are all great companies, and I've enjoyed meeting with, if not all of them, most of them. So yeah, very good. So just to start out, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, specifically the listeners who are listening probably need to talk about the stages of business, because a lot of times you hear about startups and there's the idea phase and the research and development phase, and then there's the actual like implementation or starting up.
Yeah. So I think there's the concept stage where like people have an idea of, hey, there's an opportunity here, there's a problem that needs solving in the world, and I think we can come up with a solution for that. Typically that comes from their own experience of working in an industry, and then the next area I'd say is validating that, which is, how do people want the thing that I'm selling? will the dogs eat the dog food? And does it taste good? Does it look good? Like all those things. And you need to validate that the solution that you've created for this problem is in fact a solution that the world wants. And so I think there's that validation, and then there's a scaling stage after that, which is like, now that people want it, now let's scale it up and sell it to the rest of the world.
It's so well said, John. And where we see this kind of checking out in terms of funds, let's say, is concept stage. If a company takes on money at the concept stage, it's kind of the most expensive money that you would take on for investment, because it's the highest risk. And then you get into a place where you're at more of a seed stage, or you're starting to see some early revenue. You have some traction towards your first $1 million in revenue. That's the next tranche of money. So you sort of move from like a friends and family early on. You might get an investor or two, to other more, I was going to say sophisticated, but that's not necessarily true. There's a group there that will invest in that range. And then, so that takes you to the first $1 million in revenue. And then you've got, at that point, a lot of times what happens is companies are going to start raising their first 500,000 to 2 million. And after that, once they get into the early millions of revenue, say 3 million or so, then you would raise a Series A. So, and all of that is subject to change. So everybody uses different terminology, and everybody kind of invests and calls different stages. But what happens is companies don't start to really become valuable to investors until they start getting into the first $5 million, $10 million range of revenue. So I want to say that structurally, but also I think it's really important to talk about, you can have a business and not take on outside capital. If you can build something and people care about it and they care enough to pay for it, that's a business, right? The work that John and I are in is the work of applying capital and resources at the right time so those companies can scale. And that's an altogether different road than, say, I'm going to start an insurance company and build it over a 20-year period and have it be valuable. Those are equally valid companies. So understanding what kind of entrepreneur you are is important too. So are you a lifestyle entrepreneur? The first company I visited in Bend, the guys weren't there because they were out kayaking. Lifestyle business. Okay.
Sure.
Are you a small business entrepreneur? So have a real estate agency or a single shingle florist shop or something like that. Or are you one of the crazy people that wants to be the next Google? And there's a scale there. And I think that having the self-awareness on that score around your own leadership, and then also having the awareness around what the opportunity is, can lead you to getting outside funding or not at the right stage.
And I think, just to level set, I think to build on what Julie's saying, we all work with certain types of companies. And those are companies that are trying to scale and go big. And that's a path. It's not the only path. And I'm sure that you work with lots of companies that you come across. There's plenty that are not, that's not the path they want to go down. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a different type of thing. So
Sure. So that leads me into kind of my next curiosity and question I get a lot is what's the difference between seed funding, angel funding, venture capital?
Well, so seed, I think, has to do with stage. And John, I'll be interested to hear your perspective on this, but seed has to do with stage. So if we think of concept as being pre-revenue, seed as being, we're going to raise our first few 100,000 to 2 million, and we're on our, we've got our momentum. Angel funding is, there are a lot of individuals who have high net worth that are angel investors. So there are single investors, oftentimes writing checks from a few $1,000s to more. And also there are angel groups. So there are groups that are a consortium of angels that vet and make a decision for an investment. So angel funding is used to describe individuals. It's used to describe a collaborative process. And it's used to describe the whole notion of putting money into these companies. Venture money is just a more institutional version of that, right? So these are firms or funds that are looking for deals that are going to scale and exit in big ways, typically. How'd I do, John?
good. We've spent a lot of time on what we're calling sectors and the stages, and stages are different by different sectors. And so what I mean is like a SaaS company that's selling to enterprises, what counts for pre-seed and what the expectations of what a company has at a pre-seed stage is very different than if it's a deep science company that is changing the world magically somehow. And so we've actually published, it's on our website, in the OregonVentureFund.com website, there's a perspective section, and I think it's called sectors and stages or something like that. And it's designed to answer that question. So you can look at it and say, hey, so I've got 20 customers and I think I know how to get to $1 million in revenue. So that puts me in this particular stage. So I think so we've tried to quantify it. That's a little further along. Usually what I tell entrepreneurs, and having come from the entrepreneurial side too, from an investor standpoint, like an OAF standpoint, the Oregon Venture Fund standpoint, you're just a crazy person with a crazy idea. And so how do you get validation along the way? Well, you convinced a co-founder to come join you. Okay, so now there's two crazy people with a crazy idea. Well, but interesting. Okay, and now that person has gone out and gotten a couple of customers, perhaps, that will say, yeah, I would try your product. That sounds interesting. Okay, and then that person goes and gets the friends and family, we call it, round, or angel round, where it's like people who know you the best in the world are willing to trust you with their money. And then the next round would be the angel side, where people understand the industry really well, say, oh yeah, this is actually a really good idea. And then the next stage out is you start going to Julie and I, where it's like, and when we look at it, we say, okay, what's the validation of all this? Well, we validated the people early on. It's a crazy person with a crazy idea. Maybe it's not so crazy, right? And then people understand the industry, say, yeah, this is validated. Then customers are buying, and it's sort of, you're validating the whole way around as you go along in that process.
Oh, interesting. So what's in it for investors? What do they get back?
Depends on how it's structured, right?
A good feeling, but
no, I mean, investors are in it to get money. Like that's why they're called investors. They're investing for something, and so the structure of the investment, though, matters, right? And so some investments, you invest money and they pay you back every year as a loan, right? That might be a loan. Some might do it on a percentage of revenue. What we do, and Julie as well, is equity investments. So we buy a chunk of your company, and we only get our money back when there's a liquidity event later on. So when you sell that company or go public. So going into it, if you're going to come talk to us, you need to know that that's what you're ultimately trying to do, or get to, or is build a big company that will have exit potential, because otherwise investors don't get their returns ever.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And so what should businesses have in place before they even seek out investment, or that investors look at specifically, like, we want to make sure we see these things before we'll even consider?
We are often the first institutional money that a company has. So they may have had, like John and I both referred to it as friends and family, where your mom and your dad, your cousin, a business associate, somebody says, I'll give you some money to get started. So one of the things that is really underestimated by entrepreneurs and really important as you get bigger is that your documentation is in place so that you are correctly papered and that it's organized. So for example, we recently got ready to do a deal, and there was a company that had a couple of independent contractors that they were paying, but they didn't have independent contractor agreements. That can be a huge problem. It's not a huge problem when everybody's friendly and everybody knows each other, but it could be a huge problem down the line. So before we invested, we asked them to make sure to get those signed. That's a simple example. Filing with the state and having an EIN and all of those things and having them organized. It's really hard to retroactively go back and get that stuff done. We like to see at the stage that we're investing in, which is a post-revenue typically, companies are more than a single founder. They often have a co-founder. They have the initial beginnings of a team. They have some customers in place. They have their financials are generally organized, and they have a, kind of a directional sense of where they're headed. And I'll stop there and see, John, you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think that was great. How well you structure your company and how well you have all those things that Julie just mentioned tells us how serious you are as an entrepreneur, and because it's a reflection of you and how you run your business. And so having monthly P&Ls for the period of time, having your account set up correctly, having the incorporation documents all set up correctly is par for the course, but it's like you just have to do that.
Right.
And if you don't have that, it's a huge question mark right from the start of like, okay, so how serious is this entrepreneur? I think just stepping back, I would add, like, that's the sort of the nuts and bolts on the tactical side. What you really need to have is a story of why you're going after a big opportunity, how big that opportunity is, what's your plan to capture that opportunity, and why we're the people to do it. That's the basic thing. If you're like, oh, I want to raise venture capital, and you can't show how you're going after a big enough opportunity, you're striking out on, you're not going to get past the first meeting because you haven't done your homework.
And a great way to get to that, Marnie, is for people to actually develop a good pitch deck. And this is something that a lot of incubators and accelerators and economic development organizations could really help early stage entrepreneurs with, is how do I plan? How do I articulate it? The other thing I would add too, from a strategic standpoint, is who's your extended team? So do you have a great CPA? Do you have a great attorney? And there is a lot of really good talent in those professional services firms across Oregon that can help entrepreneurs and often do some things up front to help entrepreneurs get launched.
Wow, that sounds like some helpful information. These questions come up a lot, and it just makes total sense. It's like going after any sort of money, whether it be a mortgage, anything, you always have to have your ducks in a row. So that makes good sense. Is there certain types of businesses that you are most excited about, or like industries?
Well, about 75% of our portfolio are tech companies, and 25% are consumer products companies. And the consumer products companies tend to be kind of game-changing, innovative companies that are out there, doing interesting things like Slimmerkins. And a kid's book about, and others. But we are generally industry agnostic. It's just that's kind of how it breaks down if you look across the portfolio.
We're about 60% tech, 20% life science, and 20% consumer. Maybe a little less on the consumer side. I'd say we look at a lot of enterprise software as a service, enterprise SaaS. It's a space that, if you have people that are experts in that space, that know the problem and know the industry, you can build big companies in it. We also really like these. So those are, we call them sort of workflow solutions, making things easier to do that you used to do with spreadsheets, that kind of stuff, or emails. And then the other side that we look at a lot is, we call it enabling technology. So it's something that just, you don't know how to do it otherwise. There's a magic there somewhere. And so like we were talking earlier about, Absci, there's magic in what they do. And that's an enabling technology. And we like enabling technologies as well.
So there's a lot of different investors out there. How might a business find the right investor? Is there a trick to that?
Some of it's in the network, right? Some of the magic is in our network in the Pacific Northwest, because it's not a huge number of people. And so there are organizations that have pathways in an educational pathways. So I think specifically of like Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, some of the stuff that CREDC might do specific to entrepreneurs, the Technology Association of Oregon, that are serving metro, Portland, Vancouver, right? To make sure that you've got that you spend enough time building a broad enough network to access those resources. There are also accelerators and incubators that are available. We're often surprised that when people get to us that have gone through some of those programs, they don't have much education about funding and fundraising.
Right.
And understanding that early and often, and understanding what the trade-offs are. Like, we had a company that had a board, and one of the reasons I liked the board is that one of the board members never had taken on venture in his life. He had bootstrapped everything. He borrowed money from a bank at one point. The other guy had just done all venture all the time. And so watching their different approaches to this was important. So I would say having the network is an important piece.
Yeah, and I think you hopefully are starting the business that you in an industry where you know quite a bit about it, and there's people in that industry who would say the validation of those people as investors is really important. And so I mean, the network is right. So whether OEN and TAO are great places to start for these things. Our group of 180 investors are all industry leaders, and so oftentimes it's because an entrepreneur has gone through the industry route, and the investor then comes to me and says, "Hey, John, we got to look at this company. It's in my space, and they're doing a really interesting thing." And so that's the best kind of introductions to get, and the best way to go about it is just build something really good that people believe in, that know your industry the best, and then work from there to work outwards.
And be as careful about diligencing your potential investors as they're being about you, because if you get an investor that is not a good fit, it can be both soul killing and business killing. Those relationships can be harder to get out of than other kinds of relationships, right? Because you've got that financial tie, and it can be brutal.
So just curious, Julie, what do you mean by an investor not being the right fit? Like, what does that look like?
Well,
what could that look like?
Maybe they put in a small amount of money, and then they're calling you all the time, or you have like an informal agreement at the beginning that they're going to provide some advisory services, and you figure out that it's just wrong. Like, they don't really know, because there are a lot of people now that are retiring or exiting out of businesses that are looking for ways to provide meaningful, insight, and you just have to make sure
the right fit,
because in a way it never gets any better than it does at the point where you figure out to do the investment. So if things have gone sideways even before that, those are clues.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's something I wouldn't have thought of.
The expectations of the investor, right, is, do they match what you want to do, right? Because they're like, you're going to build a big business, and you're like, actually, I don't want to do that. Whereas vice versa, they're like, oh, you can generate cash and pay me back, and that's like, no, that's not what I'm doing. then that's a huge mismatch. I do think, I think Julie's spot on with like, if they're investing to be helpful, make sure that you want the kind of help that they're going to give you. I think some of the ways to look at that would be how we coach board members and advisors is to lead with questions. So if you have an investor is coming in and telling you what to do, or is used to telling people what to do, then they might not be a great fit. If they're coming in asking you questions, leading questions that help you figure out the answers and become better as a CEO, that's probably a better investor to think about.
We had a company CEO come to us recently and share some stuff with us, and said it's just much easier to talk to you guys about this stuff than it is with some of our other investors. We disclose it, but it's just more difficult. And we said, why is that? And he said, because you don't freak out. Because both Robert and I have been entrepreneurs, as John has, right? So we've been operators, and we know that day by day there's great things that happen, and things that give you a little terror in your heart every every day that you're doing this kind of work.
Right.
So do businesses usually find investors in their region, or does it just depend? Can they go anywhere to find an investor? Or so if I'm a Vancouver startup, let's just say, or a Camas startup, would I find an investor in the Northwest, or do you go anywhere?
Well, you can go anywhere. I think it just depends on where your network is and where you get things. But so typically when you're early, being closer to home is more obvious because it's the people that you know. But we've had companies that have gone down to Silicon Valley and gotten investment handily very early in their process, or to other parts of the country.
Yeah, it all depends. It depends on what you want from your investor too. When we invest in companies, it's oftentimes we're like a co-lead with an investor who's got a strategic focus on that industry. So all of their investments have a thesis around one type of company or one type of industry. They might be doing something for sales enablement or marketing enablement, and then they know all the other industry players, and we don't necessarily. But we have, through our network of 180 people, we actually can help you hire the people that you need to build your business operationally. And so we can partner with people like that. And so thinking about what each of your investors brings to the table is also really important.
Okay, so my next question is this. You get told no. What do you do at that point? You get turned down. Do you just keep trying? Is it like any other loan or any other situation where, okay, this bank turned me down, so I'm going to go to this bank? How does that work?
One of the beauties of this area is that you're not going to just be told no. You're going to be told no, and if you ask why, you'll be told why. and I think one of the most frustrating things that I'll meet with somebody and I'll be like, your story is not quite there yet. Like, you don't have this, and this, and this. And I think you need to go do those things. And then as they're walking out the door, they're like, well, I'm meeting with Julie tomorrow. And I'm like, Julie's going to tell you exactly the same thing. and guess what? Julie and I are going to talk about you too.
Now that I know you're meeting with Julie, I'm going to talk to Julie.
Right? Yeah.
And so I think it's like, listen, like ask, learn, listen, like it's a perspective, right? It's a perspective that you get from an investor, but you could like take that and say, okay, great. So here's the areas that I need to develop before I go further with talking to investors and wasting my own time as an entrepreneur, because it's a huge amount of time to talk to investors. Like, test some things early on, just like selling a product. Your company is a product, right? And so you want to test that people want the product you're making, right? And so figure out what features and benefits of that product that the investors are looking for of your company, and then test that as much as you can before you just be like, okay, well, I'm raising money now and here's the thing. It's like,
right.
How about test it, figure out, get all your ducks in a row, and then go. And yes, you're going to get told no a gazillion times, but that's for lots of different reasons. Like, you're not a good fit for our fund, for our stage. Sometimes I don't understand how this gets to be a big business. So you're not telling me how to think about this the right way. Yeah.
Okay.
We do like 300 screening calls a year. It's somewhere in the hundreds of screening contacts a year. And what we try to do, like John, is provide actionable feedback. And you're gonna, like, I can't remember who it was, but some CEO of some major company got 400 no's before he got a yes. It's a really tough process. So we try to provide actionable feedback, and we always say, if we're interested, but there's things to do, it's like, come back to us in 90 days and let us know what you've done. And here's some suggestions, right? Because 90 days in startup time or 120 days in startup time is a huge amount of time for things to completely change. Think about like early March when we didn't know about COVID, and then all of a sudden, boom, everybody's in lockdown, and Zoom, like, things can change really, really quickly.
Very true. So wrapping things up here, what are the top 3 things you want entrepreneurs out there to know?
Okay, well, I think that self-awareness is key to success. Be clear about what type of entrepreneur you are, and have the right combination of humility and persistence to keep learning, so that when you make deals or you take money on or you don't, and making decisions, that you're optimizing your decision making.
Learning mindset is one of the things that we look for. pretty actively. I think probably the most important, well, one of the things that, just to add to Julie's, I think Julie's were spot on, is think about your investor is a partner now in your business. They're not an adversary. You're not trying to sell them something. You're trying to find someone who's aligned with you and on the success of what you're doing, and that will continue to be aligned with you and be your partner, staying there, helping you get to where you want to be or where you want to go. And so I think coming into it with that mindset is really important.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. And both Julie, you and John have partnered with a lot of businesses. That's a neat thought. Well, very good. Thank you both. Really, really appreciated the time that you spent sharing with all the entrepreneurs out there. And Julie, of course, from Cascade Seed Fund, and John Maroney from Oregon Venture Fund. Thank you both.
Great to talk with you, and Marnie too. It was really a great conversation. Thanks for the opportunity.
It was wonderful. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening. This wraps up our 2021 Grow Clark County podcast. What a great year it's been. We've had a lot of great information, great speakers. Be sure and follow CREDC on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly at mfarness@credc.org. I'm always happy to help. In the meantime, best of luck to you as you innovate and pursue your entrepreneurial dreams.